Today's guest will share his experience building luxury brands. He was the owner of one of Napa's greatest wineries and is a master of the art of the real estate deal. We talk about building brands, buying land, and creating the ultimate luxury experience. Welcome to Uncorked, an insider's look at the wine industry from the lawyers of Farella, Braun, and Martel. I'm Catherine Philippakis, head of the firm's wine industry practice. Each episode, my colleagues and I bring you the latest insights from California's wine industry and beyond. We open a favorite bottle and settle in for a chat about all things grape to glass. From our offices in the Napa Valley and in San Francisco, we invite you to uncork a bottle and join us. I'm Catherine Philippakis, and today's guest on Uncorked is my longtime client and friend, Bart Araujo, who is, of course, best known for his establishment of Araujo Estate in Calistoga and his most recent endeavor, Wheeler Farms in Rutherford. Before we start, Bart, tell us what wine we've uncorked today.
Well, this is the newest addition to the Accendo lineup. It's called Lorea. Tasting, you and I are both tasting our first vintage, 2018. And the derivation of this was really back to Araujo Estate days when we realized we were declassifying about half of the wine that after our blending session with the first wine, and there were some really beautiful wines there. And we put together by blending again, not putting everything in the bottle, but blending again and seeing the best wine that we could make with the wines that we had remaining. And we could bring it in at a lower price point, and it became an overnight success. It was a way for a lot of new customers who felt maybe they were uncomfortable with the price point of the first wine to try our wines from the same vineyards, same winemakers. And also we found that our Araujo Estate customers, I'll explain it to you this way, I guess, the best way I can describe it. They said, hey, this is really great. Now I have a weekday wine. I don't have to open Araujo every weekday. I can do it on the weekends. And now I have a weekday wine. So it's been a happy wine. It's brought, that wine was called Altagracia after my paternal grandmother, Altagracia Madrid. And now we have the same opportunity with Accendo to bring Lorea into the fold. And we're very pleased with this wine. It's complex in its own right. We make it intentionally to be more accessible early on. But we know from our experience with Altagracia that the wine will also age amazingly well. A little more in the red fruit component than blues, cranberries, raspberries. I get tobacco, I get cedar. There's some dried fruit on the nose. The texture is quintessentially what we're always after, so very fine-grained tannins and a really beautiful finish. So I hope your bottle is as good as mine, Kay.
It's delicious, and I have to say, this is very elevated for a weekday wine, Bart. This would not be a weekday wine in my household. This would be a weekend wine. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the name? Because I know you told me when you gave me my bottle.
Well, so Altagracia was a family name. That was, as I mentioned, my paternal grandmother's name. With this, we wanted to kind of keep it in the family. So Accendo, the name was arrived at after about 100 losses of names that were taken. The French dictionary, astronomical terms, botanical terms, all the things that kind of relate to other parts of our world. My wonderful assistant at the time, Michelle Fishering, took it upon herself one weekend to look into the Latin dictionary. She found a name that started with A and ended with an O, Accendo, and it was the Latin verb to illuminate, to inflame, to arouse. That sounded like a pretty exciting. It was so good that I was sure that it was taken, and it wasn't. So anyway, that's Accendo. Along comes Lorea. So we're looking, we need a word again. And laurel is, Daphne is the Greek name for laurel. Yes. And so Lorea is the wreath, the signal of excellence and high achievement. So we thought that we could include those connotations and also give Daphne a little shout out in Latin as well. So that's how Lorea came along.
I'm sure she loves that. It's a really beautiful label. It's very simple, just with the laurel wreath in the name, and it's lovely. It has all the fruit that you described, but it also has a really lovely structure.
That really evolves from the vineyards that we're sourcing. We can't create that.
I've always had an eye for land, for vineyard and for land in general. And that's a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about today, isn't it? So I would love it if you would tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to the wine world. So I know you started out doing luxury residential real estate development. And I think that was Santa Barbara, right? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. There's a little more detail than that. I should just back up and say my first real education in business management was 3 years as a young Army officer. And it was in the mid-'60s, so it was quite a time to be there. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to go to business school after that and get kind of an add-on. It would not have been nearly as meaningful without my years in the Army, believe it or not, even though they weren't fun. But in retrospect, they were extraordinarily formative for me. When I got out of business school, I did what a lot of MBAs do. You go to the highest bidder, which was consulting firm. And while they did pay me well, I found that it was not very satisfying, because we never implemented anything. And I found that I had a personal need to not only analyze situations, but implement as well. And I was also intrigued with real estate development. So I started working for the real estate arm of a large corporation. And slowly over the years, it worked for several family-owned development companies. So I got the corporate perspective. I got the privately held perspective of real estate development. Almost all of this was residential. So that was kind of the direction that I was taking. And then at one point I decided that I was either going to stay in this cushy, high paying job working for somebody else, or I had to take the leap with 3 little kids and go out on my own. And I did that with a very close friend from undergraduate. And he and I started a home building business in 1979. And our focus was on luxury, but production luxury. So we weren't building custom homes. We were building subdivisions, typically 50 to 150 homes for the first, second, and third time move-up buyer. In California, we entered a business and industry that was really established by 2 major groups. One was people like William Lyon and John Lusk, who came out of World War II. And then a number of other very, very excellent producers who all kind of started in the mid-'70s. So Standard Pacific and Warmington and Jim Peters, and they could go kind of on and on. So these 2 yahoos are out there trying to figure out how in the world are we going to compete with these? What have we done to ourselves? So we figured we had to out-execute in every aspect. We had to out-design. We know how to buy land, but that's just the first step. Then we had to out-design. We had to find a way to build with really high quality, faster than other people. And then we had to just kill it with customer service. We found that in our paranoia and frightened state, it was an interesting formula that we were able to differentiate our product from other people. Because of my experience in the military, and you have to realize second lieutenants are the lowest form of life in the military, period. And the most important people in your world are they're not your commanding officers, they're your NCOs. And my NCOs were all my construction superintendents. I had incredible respect for them just because of my experience in the Army. These are the people that make things work.
Right.
And I liked them a lot. And they reciprocated with, we were just building faster than anyone else. The other issue is really important to me and still is important to me, and that's integrity. That all aspects of our operations, we dealt with everybody, not only with respect, but with great integrity, honesty, and all that. It sounded incredibly naive. I was told by a bunch of older guys that I was the stupidest, most naive person in the world. And it's been an incredible competitive advantage over the years.
I can believe that. Well, and I know when we last spoke, you said that building a wine business was similar to your real estate work because both were about creating a luxury brand that generated trust, which speaks to what you just said about integrity, right? Trust with consumers.
If you look at it, in our real estate world, we were only as good as the properties we could acquire in the right locations for any number of reasons. We don't have time to go into all of that. But then, if you look at the wine business, it's all about terroir. What's terroir? It's location.
That's true.
We have to secure in both businesses, we have to secure the right location to begin with, because I only knew one way to do it. We have to just do a massive overlay of quality on every aspect of the wine business. as we did in the real estate business. And of course, in the wine business, we didn't have the knowledge and background I had kind of developed in real estate. But because we were fortunate enough to acquire the Isley Vineyard, everyone was interested in working, not necessarily with us, but with the property. So we were able to pretty well pick and choose people whose values we felt fit ours and our vision of how we saw this business going forward. So we ended up ultimately with Tony Soter, who had, really made his name initially at Spotswood, and then with his own wonderful brand Etude before he moved to Oregon, and David Abreu, who was an up-and-comer that, and believe it or not a whole lot of people knew about if they weren't in the industry. But Tony said, he's the best farmer in the Valley. That's who we want to bring in here. And they basically educated us. When I put together my 10-year business plan, all the underlying assumptions were ones, I had to go to them and say, okay, let's talk this thing through. I know how to put together business plans, but let's really talk about what realistic assumptions are for us to go forward and what this thing is going to look like over a 10-year period.
Well, and it's interesting because in both cases with your real estate ventures and with this, you started with a great piece of land, and then the rest of the business was a startup that you created from scratch. And now, the Isley Vineyard is one of the most famous in the world. Can you talk about the transition from startup to world-class brand?
Well, it was a little under the radar, but the vineyard was known as a pretty extraordinary vineyard to those people who were really knowledgeable. I mean, it was, I believe, the third vineyard designated wine in Napa Valley, or probably in California. I think it's California. So Martha's Vineyard definitely would have predated it in Napa Valley, and then Montebello, Ridge Montebello. So it has some great history there. And back in those days, vineyard designates were not marketing vehicles. They were only given to vineyards and wines that really expressed the uniqueness of the particular site. Most of the better wines back then were blends. We can talk about that one later. But again, having the right location, in this case, terroir, and having the right people in place who shared our values allowed us to not only be farmers, just kind of vertically integrate the whole business. So not just be grape growers, but grow the grapes with the greatest passion we could, and then make the wines, and then hopefully be able to sell them.
You parlayed the great vineyard into a great brand. So that was something that doesn't happen automatically. There are great vineyards whose brands are not well known.
In the wine business, we really have three businesses. We have farming, food processing, which is why I disrespectfully call winemaking so it doesn't get too exalted, and then marketing and sales. In our early days, we saw a lot of people who were very good at number one and number two and weren't very good at number three. It's an unforgiving business because 2 out of 3 doesn't get you there. You need to hit all 3. Very, very important. And I think just my experience with the home building business and how important our customer service was to us from the time that a person walked into one of our sales offices until they closed on a transaction. And then we continued with them along the way to make sure that anything that they needed with regard to their home was taken care of. It didn't matter if it was under warranty or not. We just took care of everything. And so it was kind of very logical to try and do whatever we could to have a very all-encompassing approach to marketing and sales. And that was both, direct to consumer and on the 3-tier side. We think it's really important. Both contribute and build each other pretty much. So
you took Araujo Estate to the peak of the business and then you sold it. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about that deal and what it looks like in retrospect to you?
Well, it was a very emotional decision. But at some point in the 23 years that we owned that property, it became apparent to us that we really weren't owners. We were stewards. We were handed the opportunity to live and work on that amazing property for an extended period of time. And it was our responsibility to make sure that continued in great hands, whether it was with our family, which was certainly our initial plan, or someone else. And we, obviously had overtures almost daily, it seemed, but a lot of the people were more interested in having a trophy than really the responsibility of one of the greatest vineyards in the world, probably. Our 2 children, we encouraged them to study abroad, and they did study abroad. And then they also ended up marrying Europeans. and they were both living, one in France, one in Spain, Switzerland, all over. Their children were born abroad, and it was pretty, I guess about the time I was approaching my 70th birthday, it didn't seem like anyone was coming home, that their worlds were really elsewhere, and that I figured that Daphne and I had a good 10 years left, but that we needed to be serious about planning for a successor that was not a family member. And then you kind of fast forward to getting a call from Richard Mendelsohn, a very good friend, and who was representing Chateau Latour. Basically, I told him no because the timing was wrong. We weren't ready to move on. And then a series of events occurred that convinced us that they were so incredibly perfect. Obviously, centuries of experience in the wine business. Francois Pinault was not going to run out of money in any venture that he wanted. They farmed organically, biodynamically. They were Bordeaux varietally based. And we just kind of decided to bite the bullet and say, right buyer, wrong time. Okay. We know the property is going to remain in incredibly good hands, and it has. And then I said, you know what? I don't feel like retiring now. So let's do it again.
And I remember when you called me about the Wheeler Farms property, it had been on the market, I think, for a little while. People had looked at it and not really seen its potential, I think, in the way that you did. Tell me what attracted you to that property.
Okay, I just want to back up one second because the first business that we started was Accendo Cellars.
Right.
In 2013, because we were thrown out of our winery and our property by those French people, which was in accordance with the contract.
Right.
We had to find another place to make wine. In 2013, 2014, we made wine at other facilities that were really very good, but they were custom crush. And custom crush always means some degree of compromise, which we had never had to deal with at Araujo Estate. So then along comes Jeffrey Warren with this property. And I look at it and two things. First of all, we were interested in our own winery. But then if I put my real estate hat on, I looked at the price and this property was fully permitted. It was ready to go. You just had to complete the working drawings and go. All the approvals are there. And I didn't believe the price built in the value of that permit. So from a straight real estate deal, I felt it was really a good deal. And then you look at the location, center of the valley, easy to get to. And so I said, okay, well, let's just build this. And it's bigger than we want. But I think we've learned some things as a very high quality producer that some compromises that we would like to eliminate. And I think we'll build them in. We want to build a facility where there are enough fermentation tanks. This is an investment decision, but there's enough fermentation tanks so we don't have to turn our tanks. You don't have to press off early because I've got somebody come in the next day that needs that tank, which is the typical formula, for example. We wanted to make sure that we had cool rooms. Some years go very comfortably and everything works perfectly and you never are sitting on fruit for any period of time. And then there are other years when everything wants to come in at once. This year may be one of those, by the way. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we have the perfect storage conditions for any fruit that we can not process immediately. There were some other issues that we have an integral pump on every single tank so that you don't have to move pumps from tank to tank. Why is that important? It takes 24 hours to get around a facility our size with about 3 pumps. There could be a difference in quality, whether you were at hour 1, hour 5, 12, or 24. And now each winemaker has complete control of every tank, and they can instantaneously do anything they want at any time. We were able to bring in our longtime cellar master at Araujo Estate, Cesar Sandoval, who runs an amazingly beautiful and tight ship. And he is the one who controls everything that happens in that facility. And I have to say that everyone who started with us, so we opened the facility in time for the 2016 crush. Everyone is still there. And we're going to lose one of our baby birds next year, Patrice Breton, who's now building his own winery. As I told him, I'm so proud of him. That's the next step for him, and it's fabulous. But everybody has been extremely pleased, including his consulting winemaker, Philippe Melka, who is a very exacting fellow, and he's great. And we literally haven't made any changes to the facility other than expanding the capacity because the demand has exceeded our initial permitted capacity.
I'm sure. I mean, I was thinking, went to pick up the wine from you a few weeks ago. It is such a pristine and beautiful facility. There is nowhere else that I can think of to do custom production like Wheeler Farms, where people can make their own wine in someone else's facility and have the level of control and just the level of perfectionism that your facility has.
Well, and then the other thing that came with the use permit was a total hospitality facility and commercial kitchen. So we can offer not just for Accendo, but also for all the alternating proprietors, the ability to use that facility as needed. So and there's no other custom press facility that has.
Well, tell us about the evolution of the eponymous brand, J.H. Wheeler, that you named for Wheeler Farms.
The original business plan for Wheeler Farms was that we would do custom crush, replant the vineyard, and bring that vineyard back. And then we would have a hospitality. Those would be our three profit centers. And then as we got into it, I said, this is kind of crazy. All this fermentation capacity. We have all these winemakers, the total winemaking staff. We have this hospitality staff. J.H. Wheeler should have its own brand. It should be kind of segmented in at a different point. So Accendo, we haven't talked about that, but you know that I wanted this time around, I wanted to pay homage to the Napa Valley, the great Napa Valley wines in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Mostly were blends. So we're in the search of a wine that will hopefully replicate some of those great wines. So with J.H. Wheeler, I said, well, let's go back to single vineyards. So, and we'll do it at a lower price point. It's not inexpensive, somewhere between Larea and Accendo. And we're going to do single vineyard Cabernets. And then, of course, we had to do some Sauvignon Blanc because we just have to. And then Nigel didn't insist, but he suggested that we do rosé. And it's one of the best rosés that I've had in California. And it's really pushing hard on our favorite Provençal rosés. So very happy with that. The wines have been very, very well received.
Yes, Bart, it seems like everything that you do is well received. A lot of it comes back to where we started this discussion, which is your eye for real estate. You bought the Islay Vineyard, you bought Wheeler Farms when other people didn't see its potential. Then you bought the Red Hen Vineyard, which you sold to Joseph Phelps Winery, and now which is part of their transaction.
I think I should get some kind of a finder's fee or something.
I think so. I think you should get a commission for that, right? How did you develop your sense for great dirt?
Well, first of all, we've been living and working here for 30 years. So we understand, particularly with Cabernet, where we believe the great sites are. We also have some wonderful friends and mentors. And in the case of this, Steve Mathiasen, who's been working with us since 2006, brought it to our attention and felt it was a good vineyard that probably could be reworked into a great vineyard with the proper viticultural attention. It sounded like a good idea. I have an incredible amount of respect for Steve. Mm-hmm. And so we went in and kind of did our typical approach to redeveloping vineyards, and it worked out very well. But we had no idea that we were going to be selling it that soon, but Bill was very persuasive. So,
well, last but not least, talk about where you see the future of Accendo.
Well, I'm very excited. First of all, the younger generation that was stuck in Europe is now back here, very actively involved in our business. So that's very exciting in the future. And now we have a few grandchildren that are mumbling about wanting to get into the business as well. So the generational aspect of it, I think, is very exciting. I love the idea of doing the blends. And I think every year that we gain more experience with each of our tremendous vineyard sources, both viticulturally and then how to treat each of them individually at the winery just makes the opportunity for us to make better and better wines. I think it's great. People couldn't understand for a while why the Araujos were doing blends when they used to just do single vineyards. But I think people understand now. And when they taste the wines that we produced since we've been making Accendo at Wheeler Farms, mm-hmm. where I think the facility allows us to bring out the absolute best in all the fruit that's brought in there. I think people are getting it now. And Sauvignon Blanc has been extremely well received. We can't make enough of it because, unfortunately, there aren't that many great Sauvignon Blanc sites anymore.
Yeah.
And so we have some, but we're really limited to our production is limited to those quality sites. And what's a quality site? It's a site that has the potential for producing great Sauvignon Blanc and actually has the commitment of the owners and the vineyardists to do what's necessary to make it excellent. And so we're very happy. We're sorry that we can't make more, but we're happy that we are continuing the tradition of some pretty great Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc alive and well.
I don't know, Bart. I think I could be persuaded to help you find a Sauvignon Blanc vineyard.
Thank you.
If you wanted to.
Oh yeah, we're always on the lookout, both for Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. But most of the great Cabernet vineyards are owned by friends of mine, and every time I broach the subject, you can't believe what they say.
I can. So, what would you tell people who are interested in investing in the Napa real estate market or in the wine industry? It's so attractive to people from other walks of life. So if you were talking to someone who wanted to start to participate, what would you tell them?
A couple of things. First of all, going back to real estate, location. Terroir is important, as it is anywhere else. Just because you're in Napa Valley doesn't necessarily mean every piece is a great vineyard. Mm-hmm. And that's with apologies to all my buddies who are real estate agents out there. But I'm talking now to people who are interested in investing. I would say that look for momentum and look for the ability, and this doesn't necessarily mean Napa Valley. This means anywhere. Maybe it's more opportune to actually think about investing in Lodi right now. If you think that issues of climate change may not impact them too much, but just, looking for areas, or maybe it's 10, 15 years ago, Paso Robles would probably have been a perfect place to go. So look for a place where you think you can really build momentum, unless you want to spend a really inordinate amount of money. And when I say spend, I don't think you'll ever see it back. You need to be hands-on. I just believe, even though I started with consultants and I still have consultants, but most everything we do is very hands-on. I think these are really, really tough businesses. And what looks very romantic from the outside, Kay, I mean, you've seen the underbelly of this, that it's very hard. I mean, first of all, agriculture is hard. We're dealing with all the inherent risks of agriculture. And just because it's grapes doesn't mean it's any different than anything else. There's probably more than can go wrong in a winery than can go right. And then you've got this incredibly challenging market environment where, you have to think when in the early 90s, when Bill Harlan and Colgan and Don Bryant and Jeannie Phillips, Screaming Eagle, and we were starting, we were like a half a dozen or something. And now I would argue there's at least 24 really, really excellent Napa cabs. And so it's harder out there. And then the rise of social media has added more confusion than anything else because everybody's an expert. So where do you go to really get advice? You used to be able to go to your local wine merchant. There aren't that many of those left. You used to, rightly or wrongly, have one or two or possibly three wine critics that drove the needle. Now there's so many wine critics, and many times they're all saying different things. And then if you get on social media, I don't know as a person coming in now how you really educate yourself. Where is the true information that will help you? So a little long-winded, rambling a bit, but if you don't mind spending a lot of money to have some fun, I guess it's okay. But if you're thinking about an investment or you're thinking about a legacy, then I think hands-on involvement is really, really important just because there's a lot of minefields out there.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else that I should have asked you and didn't?
No, I think that you hit on all of the key points that I wanted to bring up. And it's interesting because if we'd had this interview 15, 20 years ago, I probably would have said much the same thing. I think my knowledge is a little deeper now, but I think my feeling about the values that we want to bring to these businesses is still very, very similar to how it was when we arrived here. And the only other thing I'd like to say, because we get these questions, how did you get into the wine business? And of course, my answer there is, well, I was unemployed. So that's another story. The other one is, did you have any surprises in the business? And I said, well, yes, I had one. Daphne and I had one together. And we had no idea how many amazing people from all over the world we would meet through the medium of wine, whose paths would never have intersected ours without that. And that's been a real, real blessing.
Absolutely. And that is the perfect point on which to end this. All the wonderful people that we meet in the wine business.
Yeah.
And I love your message, which is that your consistency, your emphasis on quality and your emphasis on integrity, it's still your message from the start of your career through to now.
Yeah. Well, it works for us. So
thank you, Bart. I really
good. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for the interview, your friendship, and obviously all your great representation over the years. Much appreciated.
Of course. Well, that's it for today. I'm Catherine Philippakis with my guest, Bart Araujo, and you've been listening to Uncorked by the Wine Industry Group of Farella, Braun and Martel. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like us to discuss, please email us at uncorked@fbm.com. That's uncorked@fbm.com. And now it's time to put a cork in it.